Hello, hello, hello. It's me and my faithful companion, my beach companion, Hallie, who's kind of interested in me for food when I come out of doors. Checking in with the Glss Htl by Emily St. John Mandel. Um, yes, a this is kind of the big chunk of the novel with the features the Ponzi scheme, chapters 10, 11, and 12. And it's funny because I didn't read any of the background information about this section, but as I was reading it and just after, it's like, oh, I should really look up Ponzi schemes, and it's like, oh, and let's look up, I looked up Ponzi himself, the Italian guy, and then went on to the most notable Ponzi scheme because it said like, oh, he only stole this amount, but Bernie Madoff did like $18 billion in his ill-gotten gains. We're not gonna make it out here into this weather, so I'm just gonna wander back this way under eaves. But and so I looked up Bernie Madoff, and yes, indeed, Bernie is most definitely the inspiration for Jonathan Arcades. Inspiration, not like a biographical thing, but as these sections going through kind of the employer and such like that kind of do the section of it. It's very much a case of him them describing basically what happened with Bernie Madoff, that this guy from the beginning, probably as early as the 70s, was taking people's money and not investing it, but simply using new investors' money to pay returns on his clients, and then getting caught in the crunch when people wanted to get their money out and discovering there wasn't any money. And indeed, there being a figure like the woman in this thing who basically said, look, it took me 4 minutes to realize that this was mathematically impossible and that he could be getting these kind of returns, and then another minute to realize that he was a criminal, that this was a Ponzi scheme, and that the signs were all there, that he'd gotten investigated a couple of times, and had for bumbling due to bumbling and stuff like that, had gotten off. And this really does describe the fictional Jonathan Arcades really describes what happened with Bernie Madoff. There is no younger second wife. Bernie Madoff's wife, still living, I believe, at this moment. I think at least was living during the trial and all that stuff, and afterwards. Kind of distancing. It's interesting that Bernie Madoff had a couple of sons. One who ended up hanging himself a couple of years later. Both sons were also heavily involved. All his family was heavily involved in the business, one way or another, and were under investigations for whatever their culpability was in all of this. So with this Jonathan Arcades, we see him in jail and him getting more and more kind of haunted, more and more people being visited by people who had who had been his victims and who had subsequently died. And indeed, he gets visited by one, and he sort of checks, like, what happened to her, with the reporter who he kind of tries to make all his self-justifications to, and she indeed reports, oh, she died, just a little while ago. And it's interesting that one of the people that shows up is Vincent. Vincent very much as a in her chef gear, and I know from the start of this novel that she goes into the water. So if he's seeing ghosts, and he's like, in the laws of this book, all the people that he sees are indeed deceased, then this is Vincent. When he sees Vincent is when she's gone overboard and died. I mean, it's interesting. We get a lot of him in prison with a professor who seems to only have read or only want to teach The Great Gatsby. Not Great Gatsby, but Fitzgerald in general. But I have just read uh, The Great Gatsby, and it's like Great Gatsby, the J. Gatsby, Gats, is like one of the great kind of criminals of American literature, and that he comes up in a book like this, and has a reporter who talks to Jonathan Arcadius and says, like, you know, aren't you sort of like kind of emblematic of this time of financial greed, of building, of all this kind of financial house of cards? You know, you're the criminal kind of echo of what this age is, and the reason that you were able to actually flourish is because you so fit this age. And I think about J. Gatsby, a bootlegger, being sort of emblematic of the kind of the American dream, the hollowness of the American dream in The Great Gatsby. So it's a nice tie-in there by Emily St. John Mandel. So it's nice when you get to read a couple of books kind of closely together, and you think, oh yeah, Fitzgerald and the Roaring Twenties fits quite well onto Bernie Madoff, and you know the financial chicanery of our times, and just, you know, the hollow, really emptiness of this guy, this Jonathan Arcadius at the center of the thing, and it's and sort of, you know, imagining the people that would be around him, because of this section's being a lot about the employees who were around him and who were doing all this stuff. That's our puppy companion, kind of keeping an eye on the neighborhood, kind of, you know, bark at people, make sure that they know they're being watched. But yeah, the people of this that he worked with, yeah, the 17th floor being definitely a direct quote from Bernie Madoff, where they worked their this scheme, this Ponzi scheme, this robbing Peter to pay Paul scheme. And the kind of people who were just like, you know, they wanted the money, and they were willing to do whatever they could to do it. And, you know, one employee said, like, you know, is there a particular reason why we were selected to be a part of this? Like, he chose us because he knew we would be morally easy to do this, or was it the fact that anybody would become corrupt with this amount of enticement, this amount of money being allowed to them? And this whole thing about Jonathan refusing to cooperate, saying that no, it was all me, which is just patently false. Having co-conspirators actually indeed testify, you know, what they did for lighter sentences, whereas he always refused. And Jonathan Arcadius does the same thing. And, you know, what are the motives behind this, whether they're noble or incredibly self-serving motives? It's like he was somebody who's convicted at a certain you know, in his early 70s. It's like, yeah, you're never going to get out of prison alive anyway, so why confess? And got, you know, an amazingly long. Madoff's was 150. I think Arcadius is like 170 years in prison. So yeah. It's interesting. This section kind of eats up the story of Vincent and Paul, and I assume that past here, maybe we will circle back to Paul. Would be my thought, and kind of the fallout of Vincent disappearing in the water like her mother did. You know, following her mother into the water is kind of an interesting echo there that I'll be interested to look at. All right, more videos later.